In relation to Greens narrowly defined as in the Green Party, or people who identify with the Green movement, I'm sure they do get frustrated that governments don't go as far as they would like. I'm sure Jonathon did get frustrated when he was chair of the Sustainable Development Commission that the Labour government didn't go as far as he'd like. But I would say that, and this is the subject of my book, that green ideas, or what I call growth skeptic ideas, in other words, the ideas that there are limits to growth, there are these natural, social, moral limits. That notion, whether you think it's right or wrong, I would say is entirely mainstream. It's that sense I'm talking about being mainstream. In relation to biodiversity, I certainly don't want to wipe out all of the Earth's species, apart from humanity. But I would say that if we're going to protect biodiversity, one thing we really need is very intensive, efficient industrial agriculture. Because that means that if we can grow enough food to feed the world's population in that kind of industrialised agriculture, then if we want to leave some of the world fallow to conserve it, then we can do it. If we try to feed 7 billion or however many billion we're going to have in the future using organic farming, for example, which is much less efficient, we're not going to be able to do it. So there is a kind of paradox there, I would argue anyway. In relation to the problems of growth, I mean, that's a very interesting question and an important question. I would say that growth in a market economy is problematic because the market economy is inherently uneven and crisis-ridden. And you can get problems emerging from growth, but I would say the response to that shouldn't be to hold back and say, let's not have growth. It's to say, well, okay, problems will emerge in the process of growth, but let's move forward to overcome and solve those problems. That's really my take on it. Equality, I think you slightly misunderstood me. I don't think that there's automatically a trend to equality at all. It's actually quite difficult when you look at the statistics to see if equality is widening or narrowing, because there are so many different ways you can measure it. But what I think is improving, and what does improve with economic growth, is absolute living standards tend to improve. So to take China as an example, China's obviously grown very rapidly since 1978. In real terms, average incomes in China have increased tenfold. That's an incredible absolute increase in living standards. At the same time, it's true that inequalities widened in China, although at the same time the gap between China and Britain has narrowed, so kind of statistically it's quite complicated. But in terms of what growth has brought people in China, it has brought them huge benefits. I mean, if you look at the welfare indicators like well-being, literacy and so on, people in China, despite the inequality, have benefited from that rapid economic growth. In fact, China has been probably the most successful example of all time of eradicating poverty, because extreme poverty has kind of diminished hugely in China in the past 30 years, despite the inequality. So empirically, it's quite a complex question. But I would say that in terms of people benefiting from growth, that's clear. In terms of population, in principle, I see no problem with Britain having 200 million people. I see no problem with the world having, whatever, 40 billion people. There's no problem in principle. Britain, for example, we only use about 10% of the land in terms of the urbanised area, probably 10% at most. And that's because the way I see people is not just as consumers. I don't see people, as Jonathon does, if you listen to him carefully, just as giant parasites, kind of devouring the planet, devouring resources. I see people as producers, people who can not only create problems, but can solve problems. If I see 9 billion people in the world, or 12 billion people in the world, I see 12 billion potential Einsteins and Mozarts and Isaac Newtons, people potentially doing great things. That's what I have a real faith in the potential of humanity to not only create problems, but to solve problems, to overcome problems. And fundamentally, that's the difference. Do you just see human beings as kind of passive consumers who just devour these vast resources? Or do you believe that humans can potentially do great things? And for that reason also, I'm absolutely opposed to any immigration controls at all, not just for refugees. I believe in the free movement of people around the world to live wherever they want to live.
Thank you, Tanya. Jonathon.
Okay. It gets worse. We're up to 40 billion now and counting. So can I answer this question about overcoming problems? Because I think that is really key to this. I hope nobody here thinks that environmentalists are just stewing in their own depressed juices and not wanting to see solutions brought forward at speed, at scale, in a way that transforms our lives. And that's what we dedicate every waking minute of our life to doing. And I have to own up here, I am more excited now about the technological opportunities of arriving at this low-carbon future than I've ever been in my life before. And that is because the innovation pipeline now looks completely different than it's ever looked before. Because guess why? Scientists are beginning to respond to the inevitability of learning to live in a low-carbon world, and that innovation pipeline is extraordinary. So you asked me a question. I see no difficulty whatsoever in having more energy on the planet, we're in agreement on that, for 8 billion people, we're not in agreement on that, every single watt of which would come from solar power. Maybe a little geothermal chucked in, because that's quite useful. But by and large, if you look at the technology shift going on in solar technologies today, it is astonishing. And then allow yourself to dream a little bit and look at some of the outer fringe research going on about turning CO2 into an energy source, about replicating photosynthesis, so that we do what plants have done for millions of years, and learn to trap that chemical energy and turn it into energy for humankind. I actually think these are deliverables. They're available to us now if we begin to apply ourselves to that systematically. So I'm so upset, Daniel, enormously. I'm hugely excited by this notion of technology supporting humankind as it does that decarbonisation journey I talked about, that decoupling journey from 768 grams per dollar today to 6. Now, I'm still not sure if that's going to get us to that point. I honestly don't know if we can do that in time to avoid tripping this 2 degrees centigrade threshold. I don't know. I'm pretty fearful that we may have left it too late. And all the prevarication and the obfuscation and the dishonesty of people who've argued against climate change most of their lives, and then suddenly at the last minute, when they haven't got any option, they start saying, oh, they really did worry about it all the way along the line. All of those wasted years have cost us dear. But I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what you called at the back, the substitution effects. Totally agree with you. It is fantastic what IT, information and communication technologies, is already doing to improve people's lives today, and will go on doing with a relatively low environmental footprint in order to improve our lives and deliver more sustainability. So that comes to the answer about what is good growth, bad growth, and better growth. These are difficult, very difficult concepts to play with. For me, better growth is a pattern of economic activity that generates improved economic and social value for a progressively lower carbon and environmental footprint. Good growth would be delivering all of those benefits into society at a near zero carbon footprint. And that's the trouble. That's tricky. Getting to that is really tricky. So that's why I tossed out the day of reckoning, as it were, because I don't know whether we can do it. When I tossed out the day of reckoning, I wasn't doing it with a view to suggesting a kind of millenarian moment of truth for the human species. But you're right to pick me up on that, because it is true that throughout the history of humankind, we have had this sense that things are out of balance, and at different points, religious extremism has persuaded people that we're not in control of our own destiny, that somehow it'll be decided for us by something going on up there. I do not subscribe to any of that millenarian absolutism at all. And I meant the day of reckoning in secular terms, not religious and apocalyptic terms. But you do get me into an interesting territory I'm not going to unfold tonight,
Okay.
which is I do think that spiritual approaches to this will play a significant part in enabling people to manage this transition in compassionate, intelligent, thoughtful, empathetic ways. And a lot of people will draw on their sense of spiritual truth, as well as draw on their understanding of science. And I see that as largely benign, and I know that's a dangerous thing to say in a world where religion doesn't seem always to be playing a terribly benign role, but I do see that as quite an important part of the future potential for humankind in steering their way through this journey.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan.